I did not scream when I realized what was happening. I did not confront anyone. I remained silent, while something far more valuable than money was quietly slipping away from me. That silence was not fear. It was calculation. In what seemed like an ordinary moment, something deeply unsettling surfaced. Not a loud betrayal. Not a careless mistake. This was the kind of betrayal that survives on comfort and confidence. The kind that believes it will never be challenged. What was at stake went far beyond finances. It was respect. It was trust. It was my reputation. It was a life I had built deliberately, patiently, piece by piece. Someone believed I would never notice. Someone believed I would never question what felt familiar. Someone believed my calm meant blindness. They misjudged me completely. While they grew comfortable, I grew observant. While they assumed safety, I began to recognize patterns. And while they believed they were gaining quietly, they were standing dangerously close to losing everything they depended on. This was not confusion. This was not miscommunication. This was a deliberate choice. Stay until the end, because this story does not reveal itself all at once. The truth arrives slowly, layer by layer, and when it finally becomes clear, it reshapes every relationship involved. Ask yourself one question as you listen. What would you do if the person you trusted more than anyone else was quietly benefiting from your silence? What followed was not revenge in the way people imagine it. There was no chaos, no spectacle. What came next was far more unsettling. It was calm. It was intentional. And once it began, there was no way to undo it. This is not a story about losing something. It is a story about power changing hands. And when that shift happens, everything changes with it. I did not inherit comfort. I did not marry into security. Nothing about my life arrived effortlessly or accidentally. Every visible part of it was constructed through deliberate effort, quiet endurance, and years of choosing discipline when exhaustion would have been easier, and quitting would have felt justified. I learned early that stability does not arrive on its own. It does not appear because you deserve it. It does not stay simply because you hope it will. Stability has to be built patiently, decision by decision, often in silence, often without applause. I run a private consulting firm that advises mid-sized companies on long-term strategy and growth. I did not start with investors or connections. I started alone, working from a cramped apartment, sharing a desk with unpaid bills and borrowed equipment, navigating uncertainty with no safety net beneath me. And those early years, success did not look glamorous. It looked like surviving another month. It looked like retaining one client when I expected to lose 3. It looked like paying rent on time and pretending not to feel fear when the numbers barely worked. I measured progress in small victories. One contract renewed, one invoice paid without delay, 1 month without panic. I worked through illness, through self-doubt, through moments when stopping would have been logical and rest would have felt deserved. I learned to function while tired. I learned to perform while uncertain. I learned to keep going when motivation disappeared. That work shaped my lifestyle. I live comfortably now, but never carelessly. Comfort did not make me reckless. It made me cautious. My home reflects order rather than excess. Everything has its place. My routines are structured because structure protects what chaos once threatened to take away. My independence matters to me because I earned it. My privacy matters to me because I know what it costs to rebuild after it is violated. I value control. I value boundaries. I value trust, perhaps more than anything else. People often describe my life as enviable. They see the surface: stability, success, confidence, calm. They assume it came easily. They assume it was protected. They assume someone like me has never been afraid. What they do not see is how carefully I guard what I have built. My marriage was part of that protection. I met my husband, Daniel, when my business was still fragile and my future uncertain. He admired my ambition without appearing threatened by it. He never asked me to shrink or slow down. He spoke about partnership, about mutual respect, about building something together rather than leaning on one another. When we married, I believed we were aligned. I believed we respected each other's independence. I believed we were building a life based on transparency and mutual loyalty, not obligation or convenience. From the outside, our marriage looked calmed. We did not fight loudly. We did not perform affection. We moved through life with measured confidence. Family gatherings were polite. Conversations were controlled. Nothing appeared dramatic or unstable. Everything looked functional, even admirable. That appearance mattered more than I realized. Daniel had a way of avoiding conflict without appearing distant. He listened without fully engaging. He agreed without fully committing. He reassured without resolving. I interpreted that as emotional intelligence. I believed peace was proof of strength that I was wrong. His mother, Margaret, was never subtle from the beginning. She assessed me rather than welcomed me. Her approval felt conditional, dependent on how closely I aligned with her expectations. She spoke often about tradition, about hierarchy, about how a wife should fit into an already established structure rather than redefine it. Independence unsettled her. She never attacked me directly. Instead, she framed her control as concern, her interference as guidance, her judgment as wisdom. She commented on finances, on priorities, on lifestyle choices that were not hers to evaluate. She positioned herself as essential, as someone whose opinions deserved weight and authority. Daniel rarely challenged her. He dismissed my discomfort gently. He asked for patience. He explained her behavior as cultural, harmless, well-intentioned. He reminded me that family dynamics required compromise, and compromise required restraint. I accepted that explanation because it maintained harmony. Over time, small irregularities appeared. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Decisions were presented to me after they were already discussed. Plans were finalized before I was informed. Glances were exchanged between them that did not require explanation, but clearly excluded me. None of it was obvious enough to accuse. All of it was subtle enough to ignore. I told myself trust required tolerance. The first true fracture came quietly. It was an ordinary afternoon. I had finished a client meeting earlier than expected and stopped by the mall out of convenience, not intention. There was nothing symbolic about the visit. Nothing planned. Nothing dramatic. Then I saw Margaret. She stood near a high-end store, animated, engaged, entirely comfortable in a place she frequently criticized. She often spoke about modest living, about restraint, about avoiding unnecessary luxury. That contradiction caught my attention before anything else did. She was not alone. Beside her stood a younger woman. Polished, confident, carefully dressed. Not casual, not unfamiliar. Someone who belonged there, not as a visitor, but as a participant. They laughed together, not politely, not formally, comfortably. The kind of laughter shared between people who know each other well. The kind that comes from familiarity, not obligation. I slowed without realizing it. They entered the store together. Shoes. Expensive ones. I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself coincidence did not equal betrayal. I reminded myself not to assume intent where proof was absent. Then my phone vibrated. A notification silent. Precise. I did not open it immediately. Instinct connected the scene in front of me with the alert waiting on my screen before logic could interfere. I unlocked my phone slowly, already aware that something had shifted. The timing was exact. Too exact. I felt the weight of the lie settle before I fully acknowledged it. Margaret had told me she would be elsewhere that afternoon. Somewhere modest. Somewhere consistent with the values she preached. Somewhere that did not look like this. This was not that. The betrayal was not financial. It was psychological. It was the assumption that I would not notice. That I would not question. That my silence meant ignorance rather than restraint. I stayed where I was. I did not enter the store. I did not confront them. Shock does not always demand reaction. Sometimes it demands observation. They exited moments later. Margaret carried the bag with satisfaction, not guilt. The younger woman walked beside her, familiar, included, welcomed. That was when clarity arrived. This was not an accident. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. A system that had existed comfortably without my awareness. The woman beside her was not incidental. She was trusted. She was allowed close. She occupied space that had never been offered to me. That realization altered everything. I felt exposed, not because of what they had done, but because of how normal it felt to them. Because of how little concern they showed for being seen. Because of how easily my role had been reduced to convenience rather than respect. I walked away calmly. Inside, something shifted permanently. Not anger. Not panic. Awareness. I began replaying moments I had dismissed. Conversations that ended too quickly. Decisions made without me. Loyalty that existed in words but not in practice. The illusion of my marriage cracked. The illusion of respect dissolved. The illusion of control vanished. I had believed transparency was mutual. I had believed trust was shared. I had believed loyalty was understood without being enforced. I was wrong. This was not about a mall. Not about a purchase. Not about a single outlet. It was about a structure built around my silence. A structure where my effort funded comfort. Where my discipline enabled access. Where my trust made deception easier. They had grown comfortable inside it. They believed I was predictable. They believed I was passive. They believed my strength was limited to spreadsheets and schedules. They were wrong. That afternoon marked the end of ignorance. And the beginning of something far more dangerous for them. When I left the mall that afternoon, I expected something inside me to break. That I expected tears. I expected shaking hands. I expected the kind of emotional collapse people talk about when trust finally gives way. That is what betrayal is supposed to do, at least according to the stories we tell ourselves. None of that happened. Instead, something else took over. Something quieter. Something far more controlled. My thoughts slowed down, not from shock but from focus. My breathing steadied as if my body had already accepted what my mind was still processing. Emotion had delivered the message. Now it stepped aside and I drove home exactly the way I always did. Same route. Same speed. Same stops. I noticed how carefully I obeyed traffic laws. As if maintaining normalcy could prevent the truth from spreading any further inside me. Routine became my anchor. Familiar movements gave me time to think. By the time I reached my driveway, I understood one thing clearly, that I was not going to confront anyone. Not yet. Confrontation gives people a chance to lie better. It gives them time to adjust. It gives them an opportunity to shift blame, reshape narratives, and prepare defenses. I did not want explanations. I wanted facts. That night, Daniel behaved exactly as he always had. He asked about my day in the same casual tone. He commented on dinner. He spoke about work, about small frustrations, about plans that suddenly sounded hollow to me. I watched him carefully, noticing details I had never paid attention to before. The pauses. The deflections. The way certain topics never quite landed. He was comfortable. That comfort confirmed everything. I went to bed without saying a word. Sleep came easily. That frightened me more than anger ever could. The next morning marked the shift, not outwardly. Nothing visible changed. I dressed the same way. I followed the same routines. I answered emails. I attended meetings. To anyone watching, I was still the same composed, focused woman I had always been. Internally, I had already begun dismantling the version of my life that no longer served me. I started with access. Trust had made me generous with it. Awareness made me surgical. I reviewed every account connected to my business and personal finances. Not quickly. Methodically. I did not search for wrongdoing at first. I searched for patterns. Timing. Frequency. Consistency. Money leaves fingerprints when you let it. I adjusted permissions slowly, carefully, framing each change as routine maintenance. Security updates. Policy compliance. Temporary holds that would not raise immediate suspicion. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that could be traced back to emotion. I did not block anything outright. I watched. Within days, patterns emerged that I had never noticed before. Transactions clustered around specific periods. Certain vendors appeared repeatedly. Activity increased when I was busiest, distracted, least likely to notice. This was not random. It was practiced. Margaret was not acting alone. That became obvious quickly. Some movements required authority she did not have. Some approvals required knowledge she could not possess. Someone had been facilitating this from inside my life. Quietly. Comfortably. Confidently. I documented everything. Dates. Amounts. Authorizations. Sequences. I created timelines that told a story no single transaction could. The behavior had evolved gradually, growing bolder as time passed. Confidence had replaced caution. Confidence always creates mistakes. I contacted my accountant. Not emotionally. Not urgently. Professionally. I framed the request as routine review. Due diligence. Internal controls. Nothing accusatory. Nothing alarming. There was a pause on the line. That pause mattered. People who have nothing to hide do not hesitate. I asked again, calmly, for historical data. Access logs. Approval chains. He complied, but slower than before. Fear alters tone. As we reviewed the numbers together, inconsistencies surfaced. Approvals that did not align with requests. Transactions categorized in ways that minimized scrutiny. Small misalignments that were easy to miss unless you were looking for intent rather than error. This was not theft in the dramatic sense. It was misuse. Redirection. Exploitation of trust. I asked one question. Who else had access? The silence that followed answered before words ever arrived. Eventually, he admitted that instructions had come from Daniel. Not formally. Casually presented as shared decisions. As discussions already had. As approvals already granted. My name had been used as credibility. My silence had been interpreted as consent. I thanked him that I did not argue. I did not react. Confirmation does not require emotion. That afternoon, I consulted a lawyer quietly. Privately. Not because I wanted immediate action but because I wanted understanding. I needed to know the boundaries, the protections, the consequences. I wanted knowledge before confrontation. The legal landscape was clear. Assets tied to my business were protected. Misuse of authority created liability. Patterns established intent. Documentation mattered. And intent, once proven, shifted power entirely. I did nothing with that information. Not yet. Instead, I returned home and continued playing my role. Normalcy is a powerful disguise. I attended family dinners. I listened politely. I smiled when expected. I allowed conversations to unfold as if nothing had changed. Margaret spoke freely, confidently, still comfortable inside the illusion that she controlled the situation. False peace settled over the household. False peace is dangerous because it convinces people they are safe. That safety made them careless. I began tightening boundaries gradually. Cards failed at inconvenient moments. Approvals required confirmation that was suddenly delayed. Access that had once been automatic became conditional. Nothing extreme, just enough to irritate. Margaret complained first. She framed it as inconvenience, as incompetence, as unnecessary disruption. She spoke about how things had always worked before, how frustrating it was to adjust. Entitlement always reveals itself when access is restricted. Daniel echoed her frustration, though more cautiously. He mentioned technical issues, asked whether I had changed something, suggested we fix it quickly. I apologized calmly. I promised to look into it. I did not. Instead, I observed reactions. Frustration escalated into expectation. Expectation shifted into demand. Demand revealed dependence. Every complaint told me exactly how much control they believed they had. Meanwhile, I continued tracking. The deeper I looked, the clearer the structure became. Funds were being redirected to support a lifestyle that was not mine. Comfort justified by my restraint. Luxury enabled by my discipline. And carefully, deliberately, I had been excluded from awareness. That was the insult. Not the spending. The exclusion. I prepared documents quietly. Not to file. To hold. There is power in preparation that no confrontation can match. I ensured future movements required my explicit approval. I locked systems that triggered alerts if accessed improperly. I positioned myself where any further misuse would not only fail, but expose intent unmistakably. The trap was not obvious. It was inevitable. Daniel noticed the changes but misinterpreted them. He assumed distraction, work pressure, temporary unavailability. He believed his position was secure because it always had been. Margaret grew louder. She complained openly now. About inconvenience. About disruption. About how unnecessary everything felt. She framed my boundaries as overreaction rather than protection. I listened patiently. I nodded. I reassured. False confidence returned. They believed resistance was temporary. They believed I would restore access once routine settled. They believed control would revert to them. They were wrong. What they did not understand was that I was not preparing to confront them. I was preparing to remove myself from the equation entirely. Silence became my strategy. Observation became my advantage. Every complaint revealed dependency. Every demand exposed entitlement. Every assumption confirmed guilt. They had built comfort on my consistency. They had mistaken restraint for weakness. They had confused silence with permission. And now they were standing inside a structure I controlled, unaware that exits were closing quietly around them. I was no longer reacting. I was orchestrating. And while they continued living comfortably inside borrowed certainty, I was positioning myself for the moment when comfort would disappear. Not dramatically. Not publicly. Precisely. Because the most effective consequences do not arrive with noise. They arrive with finality. The gala was never meant to be just an event. It was a performance. From the moment the invitations were sent out, everything about the evening had been designed to project authority, virtue, and control. The venue alone sent a message before a single word was spoken. A historic hall, restored with money and influence, chosen not for warmth but for impact. Marble floors polished to a mirror finish. Crystal chandeliers lowered just enough to dominate the room. White linen tables arranged with surgical precision. Margaret had overseen every detail. She arrived early, as she always did, dressed in elegance that announced status without apology. Her posture was flawless. Her smile practiced. She moved through the space issuing instructions softly, confidently, the way people do when they are used to being obeyed. This was her territory. Tonight was proof of it. Daniel stayed close to her, relaxed in a way he had not been at home for months. His shoulders were loose. His voice carried confidence. He greeted guests with easy charm, speaking about generosity, community, and faith as if those values had never been compromised. They were at the peak of their comfort. They believed the danger had passed. I arrived shortly after. The room reacted the way it always did. Polite admiration. Subtle curiosity. People commented on my success, my composure, my involvement. They spoke as if my life were perfectly intact. As if nothing beneath the surface had shifted. I smiled. I thanked them. I allowed the illusion to hold. Margaret watched me carefully at first. Not with suspicion. With evaluation. She was reading my posture, my expressions, my tone. Searching for signs of resistance, fracture, or defiance. She found none. My calm reassured her. My silence confirmed her assumptions. She relaxed visibly. That was her mistake. The arrogance in the room grew with each passing minute. Margaret basked in attention. She spoke openly about her dedication to the church, about how much responsibility rested on her shoulders. People praised her leadership. Donors thanked her personally. Church officials nodded approvingly, convinced they were in the presence of someone trustworthy. Daniel echoed her confidence. He spoke about future projects, about expansion, about security. His language was bold, careless. He had forgotten how close the edge truly was. Wine flowed freely, laughter grew louder. The band played softly in the background, creating an atmosphere of celebration that dulled caution and sharpened ego. That was when the doors opened again. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. A woman entered alone. She was younger than most of the guests, dressed with intention rather than extravagance. Every detail about her appearance suggested confidence, not performance. She did not scan the room nervously. She did not hesitate. She knew exactly where she was. Whispers followed her steps. Recognition flickered across faces. Margaret froze. Only for a second. But it was enough. Daniel stiffened immediately. His smile faltered. His body betrayed him before his mind could recover. His hand dropped away from Margaret's arm as if burned. The woman moved further into the hall. She greeted people easily. Too easily. Her familiarity with the space was undeniable. She belonged here, not as a guest, but as someone who had been present before. Margaret recovered quickly. She smiled broadly, stepped forward, and kissed the woman's cheek as if welcoming family. Her voice was warm, her tone affectionate. She introduced her confidently, weaving her into conversations with practiced ease. The message was clear. This woman was not a secret. She was included. Daniel avoided looking at me. The woman did not. Her eyes met mine directly. There was no guilt in them. No apology. No hesitation. Only certainty. That moment rewrote everything. She was not hiding. She had never needed to. Margaret laughed louder after that. Her gestures grew more expansive. She spoke with increased authority, as if asserting control through volume and visibility. She wanted the room to see unity, confidence, power. People followed her lead. They always do. Assumptions protect lies better than silence ever could. The program began. A representative from the church spoke first, praising generosity and moral responsibility. Applause followed dutifully. The band played softly. The room settled into attentive comfort. Margaret was called to the stage. She rose slowly, deliberately, allowing the moment to stretch. She adjusted her jacket, smiled graciously, and took the microphone with ease. This was familiar ground. She spoke about faith, about stewardship, about trust. She spoke of responsibility as if it were her natural state, of transparency as if it had never been violated, of sacrifice as if it were something she practiced rather than demanded from others. The irony hung thick in the air, unnoticed by most. The audience applauded warmly, some stood. Margaret accepted it all with composure, her expression calm, satisfied. Her eyes scanned the room briefly and landed on me. She smiled. She believed she had won. Daniel applauded enthusiastically beside her. The woman sat comfortably nearby, relaxed, unbothered, protected by arrogance and borrowed confidence. The height had been reached. This was the moment before gravity reclaimed everything. As Margaret concluded her speech, she spoke about legacy, about being remembered for service, about leaving behind something meaningful. The applause was louder this time. The band prepared to resume. That was when I stood. The sound system shifted abruptly. The music stopped at a low hum, replaced the celebratory atmosphere. Margaret turned slightly, confused. Daniel's face drained of color. The woman's posture stiffened for the first time since she arrived. The large screen behind the stage flickered to life. A ripple of unease moved through the room. People leaned forward. Phones lowered. Attention sharpened. Margaret opened her mouth to speak, to regain control, to fill the silence. She never got the chance. The screen went dark for a split second. Then the first image appeared, and the illusion began to crack. The first image on the screen did not move. It did not need to. A still frame filled the massive display behind the stage, sharp and unmistakable. Margaret inside the church administrative office. Late evening. No congregation. No staff. Just her, alone, unlocking drawers that were not hers to open. A murmur rolled through the hall. Margaret turned sharply, her smile evaporating. Her hand tightened around the microphone as if grip alone could stop what was coming. The video began to play, security footage, time-stamped and clear. Margaret sorting documents with familiarity, opening folders labeled for donations, writing notes, signing forms. Her movements were not hesitant. They were practiced. This was not confusion. This was routine. Gasps erupted across the room. Someone whispered her name in disbelief. Margaret tried to laugh, a short, strained sound meant to suggest misunderstanding. It failed immediately. The footage continued. Daniel entered the frame, confident, relaxed. He leaned beside her, pointing to documents. They spoke casually, too casually for anything innocent. He signed beside her without hesitation. The hall fell into stunned silence. This was not rumor. This was not accusation. This was proof. Margaret dropped the microphone. It hit the stage with a dull echo that sounded far too loud in the sudden quiet. Before anyone could recover, the image shifted. Bank records filled the screen, large, clear, impossible to ignore. Transactions highlighted in red. Dates spanning months. Funds labeled for church repairs, community programs, charitable outreach. Redirected, moved. Spent. A donor in the front row stood abruptly. A church official whispered urgently to another. Phones came up across the room, recording, documenting, preserving. The truth does not need explanation when it is visible. Then the audio began. Margaret's voice filled the hall, calm, confident, almost amused. "No one ever checks closely," she said in the recording. "They trust us completely." A ripple of horror moved through the audience. Daniel's voice followed, measured, reassuring. "It all looks clean on paper. She never notices." Every word landed like a blow. The woman who had entered earlier staggered back a step, her face drained of color. Her confidence shattered. Her role exposed. Margaret screamed. Not words. A raw, panicked sound. She lunged toward the screen as if proximity could undo evidence. Daniel tried to speak, to interrupt, to explain, but his voice broke into incoherence. I stepped forward. The room quieted instinctively. I did not raise my voice. I did not rush. Control does not need volume. I explained the audit, the patterns, the misuse of funds, the legal implications. I explained how trust had been exploited, how silence had been mistaken for permission, how generosity had been weaponized against the very people who believed in it. Every sentence tightened the room. Margaret collapsed into a chair, shaking, her composure gone, her authority erased in seconds. Daniel tried to defend himself, contradicting his own words, blaming confusion, blaming miscommunication, blaming everyone but himself. No one listened. The woman began to cry openly. Not quietly, desperately. Her attempt to leave was blocked by security moving in from both sides of the hall. The illusion shattered completely. Church officials stood, furious. Donors demanded answers. Guests shouted questions that no one could answer fast enough. Then the police entered. The sound of their presence cut through the chaos like a blade. Margaret screamed that it was a mistake, that she had been betrayed, that this was unfair. Daniel went silent. Handcuffs clicked. The sound echoed. Cameras flashed violently now. Media had surged forward. Phones captured every second, every expression, every collapse. Margaret was lifted to her feet, no longer powerful, no longer admired. Just exposed. She looked at me. Not with rage, with disbelief. She had believed authority protected her. She had believed status insulated her. She had believed silence guaranteed loyalty. She had been wrong. Daniel was led away next. He did not look back. The woman sobbed uncontrollably as she was escorted out. Her confidence dissolved into humiliation. Her presence no longer welcomed, no longer protected. The orchestra packed up quietly. The gala dissolved into disorder. Tables emptied. Conversations fractured. The room buzzed with shock, anger, and disbelief. That I stood still, calm, untouched, because this was not revenge driven by chaos. This was consequence delivered with precision. As the hall emptied, the chandeliers still glowed, indifferent to human collapse. The flowers remained perfect. The setting unchanged. Only the narrative was destroyed. I walked out alone. No applause. No explanation. I did not need it. The most powerful revenge does not scream. It reveals. And once revealed, there is no rebuilding the lie. The silence after the gala felt heavier than the chaos that had preceded it. News spread quickly. Faster than anyone could control. Headlines replaced whispers. Evidence replaced speculation. The story no longer belonged to opinion or rumor. It belonged to record, to fact, to consequence. Margaret's fall was swift. The same community that once praised her generosity now spoke her name with disbelief. Church leaders released formal statements. Donations were frozen. Investigations deepened. Her authority evaporated overnight, replaced by scrutiny she had never prepared for. Court appearances followed. No elegant speeches. No curated image. No control. The woman who once commanded rooms now sat silently, surrounded by legal counsel, her posture small, her confidence erased. People avoided her gaze. Some out of shame. Some out of fear. Some because admiration collapses quickly when power disappears. Prison stripped her of performance. Inside those walls, reputation meant nothing. Influence meant nothing. There were no donors to impress. No status to leverage. Only accountability. Daniel's downfall followed closely behind. The man who once spoke confidently about future plans now answered questions in short, broken sentences. His career ended quietly. No dramatic exit. No redemption arc. Employers distanced themselves. Colleagues disappeared. Support dissolved. The illusion of competence collapsed without resistance. Our divorce was finalized quickly. There was no argument left to have. No apologies worth hearing. The paperwork felt lighter than the years I had spent holding the marriage together alone. I signed without hesitation. Freedom does not always arrive with celebration. Sometimes it arrives with relief. The woman who had walked confidently into the gala vanished from public view. At first, sympathy followed her. Then curiosity. Then silence. She lost social standing as quickly as she had gained it. People who once welcomed her into rooms now avoided association. She tried to reinvent herself. It failed. Confidence borrowed from deception does not survive exposure. Without protection, without privilege, without someone else's power to lean on, she collapsed inwardly. The performance ended, and there was nothing beneath it. Margaret's humiliation lingered the longest, not because of the sentence, but because of the memory. She had built her identity on admiration, on control, on the belief that she would never be questioned. Losing that shattered her more deeply than incarceration ever could. The public remembered. They always do. And then there was me. For the first time in years, my life felt quiet in a way that was not fragile. I returned to my work slowly. Not out of urgency. Out of intention. I rebuilt my business structure with clarity rather than fear. I removed systems that required trust where proof should have existed. I expanded carefully, choosing clients who valued transparency as much as results. Success felt different this time, lighter. Not because it mattered less, but because it no longer carried the weight of supporting anyone else's deception. My home changed. Not physically. Emotionally. It became a place of rest rather than vigilance. I slept without tension. I worked without distraction. I spoke without filtering myself for peace that was never real to begin with. Growth followed naturally, not dramatic, not rushed. Just steady. I learned that self-respect is not loud. It does not demand recognition. It does not require justification. It exists quietly, shaping decisions before emotions ever need to speak. People asked how I managed to stay calm through everything. I told them the truth. I did not stay calm. I became clear. Clarity removes the need for chaos. I did not seek revenge for satisfaction. I sought truth for survival. The outcome was not punishment. It was alignment. Everything fell into its rightful place once lies were no longer allowed to exist. Some people apologized, some disappeared. Both outcomes were acceptable. What mattered was that I no longer questioned myself. The betrayal taught me something invaluable. Trust without boundaries is not generosity. Silence without intention is not peace. And strength does not announce itself when it arrives. It proves itself when tested. I did not rebuild my life to prove anyone wrong. I rebuilt it to live honestly. And that, more than anything, became my victory.